I can still go and look and see, okay, here's constructive criticism. Here's something that maybe I need to do better. I'm still certainly not going to say that I'm perfect. But at the same time, there's just so much negativity, sometimes just purely based on what series you work for or who people perceive as your favorite driver.
Ladies and gentlemen, you wanted it, you got it. The place for the untold, real, raw, and juicy stories of dirt track racing. It's Dirt Track Confessions. And now here's your host, Mandee Pauch Mahaney.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dirt Track Confessions. I'm your host, Mandee Pauch Mahaney, and you might have just heard the voice prior to this intro here, but I am extremely thrilled to welcome to this week's episode, the voice of the world of Outlaws, and I have to add, Johnny, National Sprint Car Hall of Fame inductee, Johnny Gibson. Johnny, my man, how are you? What's going on over there?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show, Mandee. I appreciate it. Just kind of hanging out and in the middle of some pre-race homework and things like that, the stuff that I do during the week leading up to races this weekend at US 36 Raceway in Osborne, Missouri, and then the series debut at Arrowhead Speedway in Colcord, Oklahoma.
Oh my gosh. I am so excited for you to just give it all for us. Okay. So, but before we do, so we were kind of just touching on it a little bit before we started recording. Johnny, can you kind of help paint a picture for our listeners? I know you grew up in a small town, Pennsylvania, right? You went to local dirt tracks. How could you not? But how did you end up here today? Right? Like, give us kind of like the play-by-play.
So, probably goes back to the mid-1980s, just as a race fan and subscribing to the mass amount of racing periodicals that were available back then. Now it looks like Area Auto is pretty much the only one of those that have survived into the 21st century. But back then, reading Guy Smith in Area Auto Racing News and Kevin Eckert in Speedway Scene and being interested in their travels and other tracks and places that I hadn't been. And I actually met Guy and Kevin at an ARDC midget race at Winburn Stadium in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, probably like 1986 or so. Okay. And became friends with them and started seeing Kevin at more and more races, became really good friends with Kevin. Fast forward a few years, had been out of college for about 4 years and was doing a series of pretty much meaningless day jobs while playing in a band. And my goal in life was I was going to be a rock star. And I had been hanging around Pittsburgh, playing in bands in the Pittsburgh area. And at that point, just decided that I needed a change of scenery, just needed to do something different. So Kevin was living in Indianapolis, and so I moved to Indy in August of 94, right after the Knoxville Nationals. The plan was I was just going to move to Indy and hook up with another band and still continue down a musical path. But while I was living in Indy and again working a series of different day jobs, including some telemarketing and working at a music store and all kinds of things like that, through Kevin, I had met a gentleman named Bill Woodside who was writing for Sprint Car, the newspaper that Wayne Kindness had back in the 1990s. And Bill was also working for the World of Outlaws, selling their souvenir programs. So I started going to more and more World of Outlaws races, helping Bill sell programs. I'd be the guy walking through the stands with a program, hey, get your program here. It was a way for me to go to the races and get in for free and make a couple of bucks. How bad could that be?
Yep.
So I showed up to help Bill at I-96 Speedway in Michigan the Monday after the King's Royal in 1995, and Bill wasn't there. So they said, hey, can you sell the programs tonight by yourself? We'll give you the full gig or whatever. So I did the programs that night, and by the end of the night, they still hadn't heard from Bill. So Ted Johnson asked me if I could come sell programs that week. They were racing on Wednesday at Memphis Motorsports Park, Friday at Battleground Speedway near Houston, and Saturday at Devil's Bowl in Dallas. And again, I had just kind of a bit of a meaningless day job. Actually, I don't want to say a day job. It was actually a night job at that time. I was working an overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 days a week. So I worked 4 days but got paid for 5 because I was on the third shift. But I was editing newspaper ads.
Okay.
And so I quit that job, went to Texas to sell programs, and by the end of the night on that Friday, Bill had showed up at the World of Outlaws office and turned in all the stuff and said he was going to do something different. And they asked me if I wanted the program job. So from then on, I traveled with the World of Outlaws full-time selling programs. Now, at that time, World of Outlaws races were on TNN, the Nashville network. And when I was done selling programs at those TV races, I'd go work for the TV production company. I'd be a spotter for a camera or, just a runner, just whatever I could do to help. And that's how I met Bobby Gerald, who was one of the pit reporters for TNN at the time. Bobby was also a PA announcer at several tracks in California. Bobby and I got to be pretty good friends, and in September of 1996, we raced at King Speedway in Hanford, and Bobby was on the mic that night. He came up to me before the races and asked me if I'd come up to the booth and do an interview when I was done selling programs that night. He wanted to talk to me about my life traveling with the World of Outlaws and, kind of having a dream job for a race fan. So I went up to the booth, we talked for a little bit, and Bobby said, you have a pretty good knowledge of the sport. You're fairly well spoken. Have you ever thought about being an announcer? And I said, not in any sort of serious way. Bobby hands me the microphone, says the first heat race is coming out. Give it a shot.
No
I had
way.
never done any type of announcing before, had never done anything like that. So I called that heat race, and when it was done, I thought, okay, that was, a cool experience to, add to something I'll remember down the road. Well, Carlton Reimers, who is currently the series director for the World of Outlaws and was working for the World of Outlaws at the time, was at the track that night. And unbeknownst to me, he went back to Ted Johnson and said, I think this guy could probably be a pretty good announcer. And at the time, the series did not have a traveling announcer. We just used the track announcer at whatever speedway we went to. And 3 weeks later, we were racing at Hartford Speedway in Michigan, and that night, Ted called me up into the office of the souvenir trailer and said, Johnny, we're going to do something different next year, at which point my first thought was, I guess I have to go get a real job now. And he said, you're going to be our announcer.
Wow.
And I was shocked. I had no clue anything like that was coming. And honestly, the reason that I was hired, the reason the series wanted to have a traveling announcer really didn't have to do anything with my being able to call a race or be a broadcaster in any way. It all had to do with sponsors. Back then, we had a series sponsor that brought a bunch of employees out to one of our races, and the local announcer at that race never read the commercial for that company or mentioned them or anything like that, and they ended up dropping their sponsorship. So the reason I was hired initially was just to make sure that all of our PA reads got done at every racetrack we went to.
That makes sense. Absolutely.
And it was really strange kind of how it all evolved, because that first year in 97, I didn't really announce all of the races. A lot of tracks, I just did the PA reads, and whoever was announcing before still continued to call the races. It evolved slowly over the period of the first couple of years before I really, found my way into calling all of the races.
That is insane. Okay. I love that. That's like, which we're going to dive into later, but so many people are like, well, how do you end up where Johnny Gibson is? I'm like, listen, well, I don't think Johnny Gibson is going anywhere anytime soon. But the fact that you, this wasn't your plan, this was
Right.
far from your plan, right?
Right.
So, how did you, you were almost like the kid in the sands selling the popcorn, but you were selling programs.
Right, right, yeah.
That landed a dream job who you didn't even know if it was your actual dream job. And so
Yeah.
how did you, with your musician background, you wanted to, I think you like you said, you wanted to be a rock band. You wanted to be a rock star. Absolutely. I can totally see that. But what would you say was that pivotal moment of, do I continue, do you still do musical stuff?
Yeah, I do actually. Back in the day when I was playing in bands, quote unquote for a living. I was, again, working a bunch of day jobs because we never really made any money at it. But I got to do a lot of really cool stuff and have a lot of fun. But back then I was playing drums. And when I got the job with the World of Outlaws and started traveling, it's obviously pretty tough to lug a set of drums around everywhere with you. So I picked up a guitar and actually taught myself how to play guitar.
Nice.
And so I have a guitar. At one point had like 9 guitars, and I've pared down a little bit since then. But I still play. I actually write songs, and really one of the coolest experiences that I've had since starting working for the World of Outlaws and becoming an announcer was a few years ago when I was back in Pennsylvania around Christmas. I got together with some of the guys that I used to play with back in the 1990s, and we actually went into a studio and I recorded a couple of the songs that I wrote and had them play with me.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh my God. Dude,
So,
that's so cool.
I think it's still available on SoundCloud. I put it out there. I really haven't checked. I don't really pay a lot of attention to it, but
Yeah.
it's out there somewhere. I think if you go to SoundCloud and search for Johnny Gibson, there's probably a couple of songs out there.
Good for you. I love that. I love that you still dabbled per se in what makes you happy, but you're still killing it in this career. That's amazing.
And there are so many similarities to the musician life to what I do now. I mean, in some ways, I'm still on a stage every night. I'm still entertaining people in a way. And, and for anybody that's an announcer, anybody that works in broadcasting, there has to be a little bit of an ego involved there. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to get themselves on camera or be, heard, be in front of a crowd of thousands of people and not have at least a little bit of anything. So, the job that I do now still satisfies that need to be on a stage. So it's worked out well.
That's amazing. Okay, so speaking of, I think we just talked. This will be your 28th year, right? Calling the races.
Yes, 28 years announcing, and 30 in July. It'll be 30 years since I got that first gig selling programs.
I feel like you've got to be their longest standing employee. Pretty close to.
Yeah, and it's between myself and Carlton Reimers, and actually Carlton was gone for a little while, and he's been back. So between the two of us, we're definitely the 2 longest standing employees.
That's so cool. So you're the voice, okay? I love it. I love that you're just called the voice. So you're the voice. You're the person that, like you said, you get people up off their seats. You get them on the edge of their seats. You get their blood pumping. You are the hype man, right? I mean, 28 years later, how does that feel? Knowing that.
It's a little surreal at the time, but honestly, a lot of that stuff, a lot of the excitement level, things like that, it's not really something that I'm trying consciously to do. As far as me calling the races, I'm still that much of a race fan that I get that excited watching the races, and I get that excited even on my off nights when I go just sit in the stands and be a race fan. So for me, it's still as exciting as it was 30 years ago. It's still as exciting as it was in 1981 when I saw my first ever World of Outlaws race at Lernerville Speedway. So that's still a huge part of the excitement, the wow factor of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you talk about getting the fans excited and things like that, now part of that is kind of my job, and for some people, I'm sure it doesn't translate well into the 21st century when every race is live streamed. When you're at home watching a Dirt Vision broadcast, I get it that some of the stuff seems a little over the top, telling the people to stand up and the 4 wide call or whatever. That is tailored for the people in the grandstands. And I will say this, my number one priority will always be, has been, the people in the grandstands. The Dirt Vision broadcast is a way that people at home can experience something similar to what they would experience in the stands. But again, my number one priority is to keep those people in the stands pumped up and enjoying what they see. And again, if it doesn't translate necessarily 100% to the people at home, and it may not be a thing where it doesn't translate if you're watching one time, but if you're watching every night, if you're watching 90 races a year on Dirt Vision, I get it. And as as somebody who watches a lot of sports on television, I understand. But again, my number one priority is the people in the stands that night.
Yeah, you have to be there. You just have to be there. So I think I saw, correct me if I'm wrong, it was back in 2020, Johnny, that you hit 2,000 consecutive races. Are
Yes.
you? That's unheard of, first off. But is that streak still going?
I believe it is. Now, there are some who will say it came to an end in 2020. Here's what
Oh,
happened. During
okay.
the COVID year, we ran a race at the Knoxville Raceway with no fans in the stands, and Tony Bachhoven and I called the race together. Tony was in the booth at the Knoxville Raceway. I was actually in the Dirt Vision studio in Charlotte, so I was not at the racetrack, but I worked the race. I consider the streak to still be alive, and if other people want to say it ended, that's fine, because there's no real, there's no award for this, or there's no, something that's tangible. If you think the streak ended, fine. I'm not going to argue with you, because it's not worth arguing over. To me, it's still alive, and that's fine.
That's still amazing. I mean, it just gives me chills because I don't even know there's no way I could do that. Because Johnny, how many races are you, like, do the Outlaws have a year to just add all that up?
It goes back and forth. Like, back in the early days, we actually raced more. When I first started, we were racing 103, 104 nights a year. Now we're, upper 80s, low 90s, something like that. But, again, the last race that I missed, let's put it this way, the last time I missed a World of Outlaws race was Syracuse and Rolling Wheels in October of 1995.
Okay. All right. That's okay. I got you. Your memory amazes me. It's such a sponge. I can't.
And the reason I missed those races was, again, that was the year that I started selling programs. Mm-hmm. And by that point in the year, we were actually sold out of programs. We didn't have any more.
Wow.
So there was really no reason for me to be at those races. I couldn't make any money. So I skipped those two races, but then I caught up with the World of Outlaws again the next weekend, because they were at Terre Haute, and I was living in Indianapolis at the time. And then I went to the season finale, which at that time was at Devil's Bowl Speedway, because I'd never been to a World of Outlaws banquet before. So I went to the finale and went to the banquet.
Okay.
But and then I've been to every race since.
Oh my God. Okay, so we're getting to the life on the road part here. You need to pay. I remember, I forget what it was. I think we sat in your motorhome years ago. I say years ago. Okay, it wasn't 20 years ago, but it was at least a handful or some years ago, and it just blows my mind. Well, for one, you have your motorhome and you follow the entire series, yes, correct? That's how you do it. So kind of paint the picture for everyone, like what life on the road looks like for you. Kind of maybe what you do in between, like the scheduled events.
So getting back to the motorhome, first of all, my life on the road in the motorhome is my life year round, because I live in my motorhome year round, 365, the whole season. And the reason I do that, for a few years when I worked for the World of Outlaws, when I first started, I lived in Indy, and then I went several years without having a home at all. I lived in hotels year round, because at that time, I wasn't actually a full-time World of Outlaws employee. I was an independent contractor, and so when the race season ended, my income ended, and there were quite a few years in there where my winter job was actually working at the Chili Bowl. I didn't announce at the Chili Bowl, at least not on the PA system. I did the voiceovers for Greg Stevens Motorsports Video, and I also worked at the racetrack from basically December, when they started moving dirt in the building, until a couple of weeks after the Chili Bowl was done. So I spent winters in Tulsa working at the Chili Bowl and then the race season. But fast forward to becoming a full-time World of Outlaws employee, and at that time, I actually lived in Minneapolis for about 5 years.
Wow.
Loved Minnesota. Again, back to the musical part of it, Minneapolis is an awesome music city. There's live music 7 days a week. It's awesome. But I was also getting tired of 200 nights a year in a hotel.
Yeah.
So in 9 years ago, I bought a little motorhome, little 25-footer. Still had the apartment in Minnesota, but was traveling around the races in the motorhome. And that year, the last year I had my apartment, I went to Australia in the off season and did some announcing there. I was there for 7 weeks. So that year I was home 89 nights the whole year. 89 nights in my apartment the entire year.
Yep.
And that taught me how much I think I could do the motorhome thing full time, and why spend this money on an apartment where I'm never at. So I bought a bigger motorhome, sold a bunch of my furniture, things like that, and moved some stuff into storage to put the rest of it in the motorhome, and I've been on the road in the motorhome ever since. And honestly, I wish I would have done it 15 years earlier.
Yeah. You're saying you did this less than 10 years ago, Johnny. You've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying this episode, want even more, or want a closer connection to the DTU fam? Join us over in Club DTU, where you'll receive early access to all of our podcasts, live race day updates, exclusive content, special merchandise, discounts, a community chat, personal recognition, and so much more. All inside one place, Club DTU.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Well, lesson learned. I'm proud of you.
But having the motorhome has made such a huge difference in my life, because now I have home with me wherever I go. I'm sleeping in my own bed every night. I have so many more options in between races, whereas I was fairly fastidious about making my hotel reservations and having everything kind of lined up. So I would always travel from one race to another, at night, and I still do a lot of driving at night after the races. I like knowing that I've gotten to the next track, I can relax and then get up and go to work, even if that's at noon.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much nocturnal. But with the motorhome now, there are options, like if the weather doesn't look good for the next day, I can drive part way, pull over, find some place to sleep, and see what things are like in the morning, and whether the race is going to take place. Having just 10 minutes before the races actually begin, from the time that I've been at the track for hours helping to set up the Dirt Vision broadcast and walking through the pits and getting sponsor information and talking to drivers, that 10 minutes that I can come back to the motorhome, maybe make something to eat in my own kitchen instead of eating track food, and change clothes and be ready for the show, it makes all the difference in the world. It really does.
It's like peace of mind.
Yes.
I feel peace of mind for sure. So speaking of like the week to week, so let's just hypothetically say you have a race on a Saturday to next Saturday. Do you have like kind of like a concrete schedule for yourself? Like when you go grocery shopping, do you have a washer and dryer in there?
Yes.
The small little thing.
There's a washer and dryer in here, but they're very small. I most often do laundry at a laundromat. Mm-hmm. And I fit those things in wherever and whenever I can. There's no set schedule on it. In fact, going to do laundry this evening, I found a laundromat in Kansas, where I'm located now, that actually it's a bar, restaurant, laundromat, and they have live music there. So I'm going to go check that out.
That's golden. That's everything in one.
But again, there's no set schedule, but there is a lot to do in between races that maybe not a lot of people are aware of. And that's aside from just the normal everyday living life things, from doing laundry and groceries and things like that. But a lot of the time between races is spent for me, and again, it varies depending on what track we're at and what time of year we are, but doing what I call my homework, getting stats together, finding information on local drivers or on our drivers and their history at a particular track. I want to be able to know, David Gravel at Houston Speedway has won 6 times. He's got 13 top 10s in 25 appearances here. And oh, by the way, he's been on the podium, 4 of his last 5 starts here, stuff like that. So I spend a lot of time doing that sort of research. And again, it varies. It could be 3 or 4 hours a week. It could be 10 hours. It just depends on the situation. For some place like Knoxville, for the Knoxville Nationals, there are probably 20 hours or more of research involved in getting ready for the races.
Yeah, because, you're I don't want to say a regular World of Outlaw race, but you know your guys, right? Like, you know
Right.
your outlaw drivers,
Right.
but then, like you said, you're going to a home track where there's the regulars there, or you go to Knoxville Nationals when it's like, holy smokes, you need to just be on top of it.
I want to go into to Weedsport and know that Mike Mahaney has raced a sprint car there 6 times and he's got 3 wins, and he's run 10 410 races in his career and 25 360 races and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's where, Johnny, where do you even find that information? Like, is there like a main hub?
It's out there. There are some really good websites available out there. Sprint car hang on, I have to pull it up now. I know the tab on my laptop.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Sprintcarratings.com.
Okay.
Sprintcarratings.com. The third turn is really good, and then I also have a lot of records, historical records that I've kept from the years being on the road. And the World of Outlaws website as well. Now they've got, and a lot of that comes back to Kevin Eckert, who kind of introduced me to this life. Kevin was the most amazing stats man I've ever known, and he provided a lot of the historical context, to go back and say, okay, this is the World of Outlaws 26th appearance at this track, dating back to June 6th of 1979. Here's who's won every race at this track, that sort of thing.
That is amazing. Okay, so tell us, like, it's race day, right? I don't know, you can pick the track. It's race day. What does that look like for you? How do you prepare from when you wake up to the end of the night?
Again, it varies depending on whether or not it's the first race of a multiple race weekend. Ideally, what we do, and I say we with the Dirt Vision staff now, if we can set up the broadcast the day before, then that's what we do. Like this week, we're racing Friday at US 36 Raceway, so we'll set up on Thursday. And that's anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on the logistics of setting up all the audio equipment, tying it all into the video stuff. I have to tie everything into the track's PA system so that everything that we do on Dirt Vision goes out over the PA as well. Finding the right frequencies for the wireless microphones, walking around the infield and testing, does it work here, does it work there? Just things like that, again, just tedious at times, but all part of the necessary things that we have to do to provide a broadcast. So on a day like Friday, if we've set up the day before, it's a little easier for me. If I show up around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just do another real quick check of all the mics just to make sure nothing's changed overnight. And then I will walk through the pits and talk to drivers that haven't raced with us to that point in the season. I want to make sure I've gotten all of their sponsor information correct, what kind of chassis they're running, things like that. Talk to a local driver who maybe has experience at that track that some of our guys don't have. What to look for? What does this track race like? Does it get slick? Does it stay wet? Where's the tendency for the groove to be? Is it a top track, a bottom track? That sort of thing. So that's my race day, from 1 o'clock till 4 or 4:30 or whatever. Now, on a day where we have to do setup and race the same day, it's arriving at the track a little earlier, getting there, noon, 11:30, noon, somewhere in there, setting up all the equipment, and then back to the same routine of going through the pits and talking to drivers.
Mm-hmm. I always like that. I always like, whenever I go to the races, I see the announcer in the pits. It's you need to do that. It's a part of your job.
It is. It really is. And there are local announcers who don't do that, and in some cases, I get it, because that's not their full-time gig. They're maybe, helping out. They do this, on the side a couple days a week for a couple bucks extra. But to me, if you're doing this for a series or doing this professionally, you absolutely need to, have that work ethic to be able to go in and do that. I go back to, I was at a race at Putnam County Speedway in Florida. This has been years and years ago. The announcer there was a local radio DJ who, was hired for his amazing voice and his presentation, but really didn't know much about sprint car racing, to be sure. Mm-hmm. And he showed up 5 minutes before the races started, and somebody handed him a list of the drivers and their car numbers that were there, and he, never went and asked drivers how their names are pronounced, butchered a lot of names, didn't know much about the type of racing, and it's really difficult for me as a fan to sit in the stand and hear that, because to me that, have a little bit of pride, do a little bit of minimum research if you're going to do something like that. I haven't done many non-sprint car races in my career. Last year, I was very flattered that Bob Sargent and the folks from ASA called and asked if I would come to Five Flag Speedway in Pensacola and be part of the first race back for the iconic pavement late model brand ASA and be part of their broadcast team. And it was definitely out of my comfort zone, but I made sure to try to do at least a little bit of research on what I was getting into. I wasn't familiar enough to just look out and see a car and identify that driver just by the look of the car. But I was able to have at least a bit of a sheet put together where I could look down and say, okay, this is so-and-so, and he raced, 16 times last year. His best finish was here. Or, hey, this guy ran a road race in, Newfoundland, Canada last year, and he's now here at Pensacola racing on the pavement at Five Flag Speedway.
Wow. Okay. That had me thinking, does it ever throw you off when, your regulars, when they switch rides?
A little bit. It definitely takes time to get used to. Honestly, one of the biggest difficulties I have as far as being able to visually identify a car and make that quick, mental connection is the Knoxville Nationals, because so many guys have a special paint scheme just for that race. That by August you've gotten so used to identifying a driver just by a certain look. You can glance out of the corner of your eye. Oh, orange and black car. That's David Gravel. And then they have a white car for Nationals, and it's like, who? Oh, that's so and so this week.
That does make it difficult. Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. So, I've always wondered. Now, if it's a secret, I don't know. You don't have to tell us. But I am super curious because I think I've seen it maybe once. I've like looked over the shoulder of an announcer in the in the booth. But I've always wondered, do announcers, or like in general, maybe do you use something in particular, like an app or a spreadsheet of some sort, to pull up those stats like you were talking about?
Oh, absolutely. I've got a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that I keep everything on, and then I'm still very much old school in that I print it out. I actually have a sheet of paper in front of me so I can just glance down. I have it all in numerical order. So I know about where on the sheet to look. If I'm looking for car number 46, glance down. Okay, here's the stats. And the stats on there are a bit of my own type of shorthand so that I don't have to print everything out, but I can look down and see, okay, the first thing in this stat are two numbers in parentheses. Okay, that's where he finished the last two times he raced with the World of Outlaws at this racetrack. I have, best World of Outlaws finish, what track, that sort of thing. And yeah, it's all on a spreadsheet. It's certainly not all memorized. Definitely not. I'm not that good.
No, and I can only imagine if someone were to look at your cheat sheet and they'll probably be like, what is this?
Actually, last year, Hannah Newhouse came and did some pit reporting with us at Beaver Dam Raceway. Chase Rodman wasn't able to make the races that week. And so I know Hannah doesn't do a lot of sprint car stuff, so I printed out my stat sheet and gave it to her. And then we had to have like this little tutoring session in the Dirt Vision trailer a couple of hours before the races. Okay, here's how to read my stat sheet. Here's what this means. Here's what this means. And that, and we went through the whole thing. But yeah, it's a little different.
I love that. So now, super curious, are there certain races or maybe certain tracks that you love to call? Like you look forward to it?
Yeah, well, I mean, any of the big races, like the big events like Knoxville Nationals, still amazing to me to get to call that. Kings Royal, Williams Grove National Open, all the marquee events. And then there are places where I just know when we go to that racetrack, we're probably going to have a fantastic race. They're my favorite racetracks. I've said this before, and I know I shouldn't show bias perhaps, but my favorite racetrack is River City Speedway in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and I've been to 300 and, Saturday night, assuming we get to race at Arrowhead, will be the 399th track I've seen racing on.
That is insane. Oh my God. Okay, I remember growing up, my brother always had like in his little desk as a kid, like I wonder if he still has it. He started a list of all the tracks that he's gone to.
Right.
And I'm like, I couldn't even tell you. There's listen, Johnny, when growing up, my parents they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're going to Lincoln." And I mean, Dad, when I grew up in the 90s, Dad was racing sprint cars and modifieds, like it was a mix. So,
Right.
I'm like, wait, is that the track with like the checkered flag steps going down? Like, I couldn't tell you. Let alone to remember that and write it down. God bless you. No way. So,
By the way, before we move on, I do want to tell you this because I've published this list in a couple different places, but people ask me who are the best race car drivers you've ever seen, and I differentiate the best sprint car drivers, the best overall race car drivers, and your dad's in my top 5 of the most talented race car drivers I've ever seen in my life. So,
oh, that's amazing. Thank you. I love that. Yay. That's so cool.
people don't realize what all he did, in a sprint car, in a modified, when he jumped in a pavement modified, the Race of Champions at Flemington. That's just. Definitely one of my favorites and one of the 5 best I've ever seen behind the wheel of anything you put him in, he'd be fast.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, I complain probably at least twice a year that my parents had me in the wrong era. Okay, because I missed all the good stuff. I missed all the good stuff. I mean, I got to grow up at Williams Grove on Friday nights and I don't know, Flemington and New Egypt and all this stuff, but it actually wasn't. I don't know if you've read my dad's book yet or not, but it was.
I haven't had a chance to yet, but I will. I definitely will.
It's Johnny. I've always heard the stories. The Race of the Champions when he came back from last, just jumps in this car. There's so many, but until I actually read the book, like you said, in chronological order, I'm like, holy crap, it just makes sense now. Because I missed so much of it, and I hear all these stories, and now I'm just like, from here to here, I get it now.
Right. Something I'd like to jump into really quickly, and it's something you just sort of brought up, and I don't think you were meaning to bring it up, but I want to touch on it. When you said grew up in the wrong era, back to what we were talking about earlier about when I got my start and how I started announcing, and I will say this, I was very fortunate in the early portion of my career that I had several years to basically suck at my job, and the only people that knew it were the people that actually attended the race that night, and most of them probably couldn't hear me anyway because the PA systems weren't very good.
It's so true.
But in this day and age, I really in some ways feel sorry for young announcers just getting into the sport because everything is so magnified now because it seems like every race is live streamed and you've got a ton of eyes on you who can hear everything that you say clearly now, and it is very difficult for a young announcer to find their footing and establish their career and have to deal with what is now, this intense scrutiny because of streaming and then because of social media. The comments that I see that, people say about announcers, drivers, officials, anything. You know as well as I do that social media can be a very negative place a lot of times, and that's got to be difficult for somebody. It even still affects me to some extent, although I've tried to do my best to just kind of block that out. And again, at my age and in my position, I'm fairly secure in my comfort level and my abilities, so it's easier for me to block out the external noise because I'm 30 years into this. If I were really awful, I probably wouldn't have made it this far. So
it's funny you mentioned that because it's so true. I mean, in the 90s, you had to be there. Literally had to be there. Now it's like people expect you to be best out of the box. But that really, it's so hard for me because it surprised me, but unfortunately it doesn't surprise me. Like being the legend that you are. You've been doing this for 28 years calling races. Like people actually have something bad to say about you.
Well, and I understand that. And I, there's a difference between looking for any thing bad to say just because you don't like a particular person, to doing things that I can still go and look and see, okay, here's constructive criticism. Here's something that maybe I need to do better. I'm still certainly not going to say that I'm perfect, and I look for things to improve every year. But at the same time, there's just so much negativity, sometimes just purely based on what series you work for or who people perceive as your favorite driver or whatever. And one of the things I've tried really hard to do throughout my career is not to have a favorite driver or, be seen as somebody who, is, more biased toward a certain team or certain region of the country. One of the things that you will not see me do away from the racetrack, I don't own any driver shirts. I take that back. I don't own any current driver shirts. I own a couple of race shirts of drivers that are no longer racing.
Yep.
But you will never see me in a driver's shirt or apparel just because I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair for a track or series official or employee to be, in some race driver's apparel. It just, the appearance of impropriety.
Yeah, and it's so spot on because I don't know how long ago it was, but I had just graduated college and I went on the road with the Super Dirt Car Series and I loved it, but I'm biased. That's when I actually started dating Mike, was that year. I'm working for the Super Dirt Car Series. I'm dating a race car driver that's in the Super Dirt Car Series. Like, that's a big red flag to me. Not that I had pull in any of that matter, but it doesn't look good. Right. And it's definitely a gray area. So especially what you do, I respect that immensely because there's a lot of people that, I don't know, have pride, which is, it's okay. It's okay to have said favorites, but not voice it.
Right.
With what you do.
Right.
Yeah. So okay, so kind of going off of the deep combo here a little bit is, do you feel like there are any struggles with what it is that you do? Maybe something that you've learned the hard way, in the past of any of that sort?
I say this all the time, and it probably sounds cliched by now, but it is certainly no less true. I am the luckiest race fan in the world. I get to see the greatest sprint car drivers in the world go at it night in and night out, and I'm sure you're probably aware that I keep up my identity as a race fan. Like, I go to a lot of races during the year that are not World of Outlaws races. I just go and sit in the stands.
Yep.
Now, having said that, again, I would not trade this life for anything else. But there are certain things that, have had to be sacrificed to be able to do this. I've never been to a high school reunion because my high school reunions are always in October and we're still racing. Mm-hmm. Don't send me an invitation to a wedding or, something like that during the race season because I'm not going to make it. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it's like to take a weekend in the summer and go to the beach or, go to the lake for the weekend or, just things like that. There's really no flexibility in my schedule. I want to do this. Okay, well, here's a day that I can go do that. Oops, we had a rain out. There's a race rescheduled for that day.
Yep.
Again, it's a very different lifestyle. Now, I am very fortunate in the fact that my girlfriend understands this lifestyle. She actually has grown up around racing, not involved, but just as a fan. Mm-hmm. But and she actually works for a company that now is one of our series sponsors. She is the national sales director for Microlight that sponsors our Last Chance Showdown.
That's awesome.
But so going back 1 second to all the negative stuff about social media, there are still some very big pluses as well. Again, you get to find out driver schedules and things about the team that maybe I wouldn't have known without social media. And social media also got me my girlfriend because she followed me on Twitter and I noticed her and slid into her DMs, and here we are 3 years later.
There is a positive. There's always, where there's a positive, there's a negative, but where there's a negative, there's a positive. Yep. So I love that. Okay. Oh, now I'm going to circle back to what you just said. So I, same as you, would never, ever, ever trade my life for anyone, anything else. I love it. However, listen, Johnny, there's days, so up in, not that this is like the one thing I would skip the races for, but up in New York where Mike's team, this is what happens when I talk with my hands. Where Mike's the car is kept, right? So
Yep.
we go down this one main road, and we're in the Adirondacks, so it is beautiful in the summertime. People are out hiking, and there's this beautiful waterfall that you can jump off of. And there's always, like, people are bringing picnic baskets and all this stuff. And when it's, like, 95 degrees out, we're sitting in the toter that barely has air conditioning. We're on our way to a 6-hour drive, and I'm looking at him. He's looking at me. I'm like, can we just pull over and just not go to the races? Like, tell me there's a time when you're just like, you know what? It would be nice to just have that. But at the same time, I don't know. It's you can't have it all, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think about things like that once in a while. My biggest thing is back to the musician thing: concerts, music festivals, things like that. The Louder Than Life festival in Louisville, Kentucky last year. 4 days, massive stages, you know, like different stages, and all these great bands. I was like, you know, I told my girlfriend Melody, I'm like, if I were going to skip a race, it would be for something like this. And
Yeah.
but you can't. And I know myself well enough as well to know that the moment I skipped a race to do something like that, I wouldn't be able to enjoy the other thing because I'd be thinking about what I'm missing at the races.
It's hard. It is hard. But it is you. You are the voice. The voice is you. Speaking of, has the voice ever lost his voice?
Yes. A couple of times. Most recently, what was it? 3 years ago at the King's Royal. It was bad. It was really, really bad. As a matter of fact, we brought Tony Bachhoven in from Knoxville, and Tony and I ended up doing the show together. But basically, Tony was kind of on standby if I couldn't talk at all because it was really bad. And I went to the doctors, I was taking meds, and it was just one of those things that I, you know, got some sort of sinus infection or something, and it took my voice. And it actually took me a couple of weeks to fully recover. Now, fortunately, in nearly 30 years, it's only happened a couple of times. But, and I should probably do things to take better care of my voice. And I never have had to because I've never been the type that, you know, talking too much makes me lose my voice. I've been able to do 5-6 nights in a row and not have any issues.
Interesting. That was going to be the question. Like, do you chug water? Do you drink some honey, some lemon? No, you don't, Johnny.
No.
I was hoping you were going to give me a secret. So, okay. Running off of that, I'm going to guess, but we'll let you tell me. Do, like, life on the road. I mean, you are in your house, so you, like you said, you cook yourself dinner, but is there anything that you do for yourself mentally, physically, to help kind of, I don't know, stay afloat?
Honestly, going to other races.
Yeah?
Being able to still be a race fan and bring that type of enjoyment over to what I do, because as much as I love my job, there are those nights where it's, you know, it is still a job. Yes, I love my job, but it's still something that, you know, I'm required to do. And being able to go to a race and show up at 6 o'clock and
Yes.
sit in the stands and drink a beer and not have to be there at noon or 1, or if I'm not enjoying myself, being able to leave at, you know, 9 o'clock and walk away. Again, just that sort of thing keeps me being a race fan in my job.
I like that. I like that. It keeps it fun.
Yes.
Keeps you happy. So, question for you. Well, no, not a question, because I've just been asking you questions. Another question, Johnny. What would you say drives you to want to do what it is that you do?
Just the fact that I enjoy it so much. I mean, I am a race fan. Again, I am the luckiest race fan in the world. I get to do something I really, really love for a living. I get to see fantastic races, and I get paid to talk about it.
Which is wild. Yeah. Like there are jobs out there that exist like that. That's
Yes.
so cool. So, when you're traveling or when you're at the races,
Right.
are there any, spitball it at me here, but are there any little hacks that you do? Whether it's, I don't know, because you don't do a voice hack, all right? I was expecting something there, just a little something. But whether it's track to track or, homework, listening to podcasts, studying people, whatever it could be, the laundromat, I don't know. Is there something?
I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I'm just so used to this life now that what might seem like a life hack to somebody else is just the normal way I do things.
Yeah.
Something that I will deal with later today because you mentioned grocery shopping. I'm actually going to the grocery store later today. Things that people who are stationary probably don't realize, but when you're on the road, okay, you go to a grocery store. Why are all the major grocery stores all laid out differently? Kroger is different from this, which is different from this. It's like, why can't they all be the same? Like, I know when I go into this grocery chain, okay, the veggies are going to be off on the right, and, the dairy products are going to be in the back left corner. And then you go into another chain, like, okay, no, that's not, or what they keep together in the aisles, okay? In this aisle, you have this, and this, but they're not together in the same aisle the next place you go.
So it is, Johnny, it is so funny you said that because I kid you not, last night I had a training. And so I told Mike, I was like, there's a few things we need from the grocery store, and he's never goes to the grocery store. And so I tell him, I give him like a list of 5 things. And one of them was eggs and almond milk. And he comes back and he's like, it took me 15 minutes to find the eggs and they were right behind me. Okay. They're normally like, what is it? Up against the wall in like the refrigerated section,
right.
But it was like in a little island in the middle of the aisle. And he's like, they don't belong there. I don't know who designs these grocery stores.
Right.
It is complicated. I like that. Everyone, yeah, there's a method to their madness, but we should just all work together. Make life easy, So
the little things about being on the road, again, that a lot of people take for granted at their stationary homes. Okay, I am coming up on this 4-week stretch of races here, and here. I need to get a haircut sometime. Where do I go?
yeah.
It's, great clips, super cuts, things like that, because that's what I know. That's what I know is probably going to be available somewhere where I'm going to be located.
Yeah, because it's not like you can
Right.
have a regular barber and schedule
Right.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you just hope that
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. I hope this one turns out okay, and if not, well, it's going to look a little strange for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Now there has to be places where, I know you're talking about like hitting some new tracks, but there's got to be places where like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Like if I go to this town, I'm going to this grocery store and they have awesome stuff. And if I go to this town, I know somebody that works at this salon or whatever that I know I can get a good haircut here. So maybe I wait that extra week and know that I'm going to this place.
It's so funny that you said that because I interviewed Shoeheart's girlfriend Summer.
Yes.
Early January, and
I saw it. I watched the podcast.
Did you? Yeah, and she said the same thing. She was like, well, especially being a female, Johnny, love you, but you're not coloring your hair. I mean, you're not like doing all kinds of perms and stuff, right? Like you're just popping in, popping out. And she's like, as a female, what do I do with this?
Right.
And I'm like, what do you do with that? I don't know.
Yeah. Although back in the days when I was playing in bands, my hair was longer than yours.
That I believe it. I think you don't need to go to Great Clips, man. You don't just grow it out. Just grow it out. Bring it back. So I love to always close my episodes with like a little tip, a tidbit, a takeaway of some sort. Now, I have had people in the past actually ask me, how they can become an announcer, how they can become a pit reporter, or really just be like involved in the sport. But for your sake, let's go with, being an announcer, being TV broadcasting of that sort. They don't know where to start. They don't know how to get their foot in that door. What advice would you give to someone who wants to do essentially what you do?
That probably has changed over the last 5 to 10 years, again, with the advent of streaming, and the ability to do stuff like this podcast and do things via a laptop. I would say watch races, watch videos, maybe call those races, put together an audition tape, get it out to all the folks that do live streaming. Oh, Claude is in the background there. His feeder just went off. That's
Meanwhile, my alarm just went off. I guess we got the same alarm.
So this is Claude, by the way, behind me. That he's eating now, so he's busy. But he lives in the motorhome, but he's technically my girlfriend's cat. But he's lived in the motorhome with me for 3 years now.
I think he's yours. Well, yeah. We can share. Yeah.
But yeah, he's the motorhome cat, and he travels the World of Outlaws circuit.
I love that.
But anyway, getting back to your question, put together an audition tape, basically. Mm-hmm. And now on a local level, in addition to doing something like that, I think the best way to get involved on a local level is just make yourself available. Show up at the races, go to the announcer, not when the program is going on, but a little bit before or right after the races, and say, hey, I'm interested. Is there something, that you guys need help with? Maybe you kind of become his assistant or whatever, and it leads to an opportunity. But the biggest thing is just to be around, to be available, because I think this as well. In the dirt track industry, that's 90% of it is just, somebody who's there. You need people who are there.
Yeah, it's so true. You might not want to start selling programs, but look at where you ended up,
Exactly.
That's, I think, and it's so funny because people always ask me like my timeline of how I've gotten to where I am and the things that I've done. And I'm just like, well, I actually worked for a program company too. I worked for, PDI. So he actually is right in Flemington, and I helped him. I did high school, half days of high school. I would leave, go to his house, and I would get sponsors. Okay. Right? I would get advertisement in the programs, and then I was doing intermission at Big Diamond Speedway. I'd be doing kids festivities in front of the grandstands with a microphone, and it's the smallest little things that just lead to the next thing. Getting in front of people, meeting new people, just like you said, being there is huge. Yes. So huge.
Absolutely.
Oh man. Okay. Johnny, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I knew I had to bring you on. It means so much to me. Thank you for all of you, that are listening in, but most importantly, Johnny, for you for doing what you do for our sport. And
again, I appreciate that, but again, I am just a race fan and a very fortunate one who's been able to put together, some sort of a career doing what I love. But again, thank you for having me on. Doing things like this is really fun for me. I enjoy this. I enjoy the conversations, and maybe see you around at a racetrack sometime.
That is the goal. Absolutely. I will come find you. But everyone that's listening in, when you see Johnny at the races, wherever you might be, give him a shout out, tag us, share this on social media, share this with your friends, let us know what you thought. But again, thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, and we will catch you guys all next week. And if anything, we're going to see you all at the races. You're going to hear him at all the World of Outlaw races. So either way, you're going to find us there. So thank you guys, and we will catch you next week.